But today I am getting together with my friend, Bennet Weiner. Bennett is the COO of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance, and he and I work together pretty regularly on a project. Last week, Bennett and I were chatting around one of our business calls, and he mentioned that his 93-year-old mother was going to be celebrating Passover with him long distance. And I marveled at that. But then I kept thinking and thinking and thinking about Passover and really wished that Bennett and I could talk about it, because the story of Passover just seems to have so much relevance right now. So thank you for joining me, Bennett.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth.
So how did your mother do with the technology?
Well, this was the first Zoom Seder that we ever had, and I imagine at a number of Jewish households across the country, they probably were doing the same thing in many cases. My family is spread out all over the East Coast, and because of the coronavirus crisis, we can't all get together and travel and be with each other on the holiday. So as an alternative, someone decided, hey, let's try Zoom this time and see if we can get together that way. So my mother, who is, retired in Florida, she is 93, God bless her, and she was alone for Passover. We didn't want her to be, not participating in some way. So someone had the idea of, let's do a Zoom meeting and send her an iPad and have someone link it up so that she can see everyone and participate as if she was in the room with all of us, so to speak. And so that's what we did. And we got someone to help her set up the iPad at home because she is not technically savvy. And we were able to connect with her as well as other members of my family. And so it was an unusual meeting. We had about 12 of us on the Zoom call and we're all in different cities. And we were able to be with each other during this time. So it was a real special thing for doing this for the first time.
That must have blessed her immensely.
Even though her vision is bad, and I don't think she could have seen everyone clearly, she heard everyone and she felt that she was part of the gathering. So that's the important thing. The emotional tie, I think, was made that we were able to be with each other on the holiday.
So I imagine that your Seder is a lot like the American Thanksgiving.
Oh, very much so. And a lot of Jewish families, just like Thanksgiving, we get a long table together. The families have this big meal. It is very much like a Thanksgiving gathering in terms of we're all getting together for this meal event. Mm-hmm. So it's a special time for families to be with each other. But also it's symbolic, because we read the prayers in the Haggadah, which tells the story of Passover. And obviously, the irony is that in Passover, they talk about the plagues, and here we are, all involved in our own plague with the coronavirus that we're all experiencing in dealing with, and it just made the story much more relevant this year than it had been previously, and made it very special in that way.
There's a lot of people who are familiar with that story and can see the symbolism in that and the different connections between then and now.
That's true. And the other thing I'm thinking is that, not everyone in my family is very religious or, like every family, they're very religious people and people at the other end of the spectrum that are not at all. And I think that this time, however, the story had that special meaning. And, stories are a way of, they're immortal in terms of, we pass them from generation to generation. And it's a way to connect with culture and with emotion from times past, and also lessons learned. And in some ways in my job, because I deal with charities in my job, and they use stories too in their own fundraising to try to emotionally connect with potential donors. And so stories have that symbolic and metaphor meaning, I think, in all religions, and particularly with the Passover tradition, it was a little bit different because of, again, the situation that we're all facing around the world with the virus.
And certainly the story of the plagues, it has a place in the Christian tradition too. And one of the things that I kept going back to over and over in my thinking was that the people, God's people, were required to do something to help
Hmm.
protect themselves.
Right.
And we are all being required to do something right now too. Actually much easier, correct? by
Yeah.
by staying home. And I can't help but remember that there were many, many people who did not participate in the doing of something.
Hmm.
And there are many people who are not participating right now too. We have that choice. And I'm just continually ruminating over these parallels.
Yeah, and there are parallels and also differences because if people aren't doing social distancing or are not covering the face with a mask, it's not just endangering them, but it's also endangering others. And so there is that aspect of it that it's the importance of responsibility and community. And some people are stepping up to the plate, and they say 90% of Americans are following this advice, but there is that 10% that are not. And if you go out to your grocery store or the pharmacy, I know in my area, I see people who aren't doing what they should be doing, who aren't wearing the mask or doing other social distancing things, and are acting like it's just any other day. And that's sad that they're really not taking the message to heart. The other thing is that, the message of Passover is also, it's not just about hardship, but it's also a message of freedom, about the freedom from oppression. And that was one historically has always been the message that is relevant to all peoples because we all experience in all cultures times of hardship and then we get past them. And that's an important lesson to be learned and something that everyone can relate to in some way. And that message, I think, feels also relevant because we feel confined in our own homes in a way, and we don't have the same freedom that we used to. And we're hoping for the days when we'll be able to do the things that we always do. And so in that sense, it's almost a self oppression because of the circumstances that we're in. And so there are a lot of metaphors I think that can be crossed over into the times we face. But as I mentioned earlier, the stories somehow give us strength in knowing that peoples have experienced hardship before and been able to go through it.
And the
And
celebration. Today, the celebration is happening because we were freed from that oppression. Maybe there will be a great celebration when the oppression of the coronavirus is finally lifted too. The fears, the worries, the concerns, and maybe our release from our homes and our restrictions.
right.
But, but Bennett, I have a feeling though that we don't appreciate quite, I don't even know how to say this, how easy we have it.
No, I know what you mean. And my own mother, who is 93, she was a child survivor of the Holocaust. She was a teenager during the war. She, and her family experienced a lot, and quite a number of them did not make it and went to camps and lost their lives. But thank goodness she survived. I think that reminder is that as bad as we think things are now, there are times when they were worse for peoples, and those memories and recognitions also help in understanding that it's still not as bad as other circumstances have been, and we can get through this by supporting each other and participating in the way that we need to do to survive.
That's right. And one day we'll be telling stories about this.
Yes.
So I can actually imagine your family sitting around the table or their own tables with their laptops and their iPads all propped up and talking to each other. Do you see this as a way of going forward into the future?
It might be, as people get used to this idea, they may be more of it. I know the interesting thing was it's just not only being together during the ceremony when you eat the matzah and other special foods as part of the ceremony, but during the meal, we were all eating our separate meals on the Zoom video and then talking to each other and being jealous of what someone else was eating while you got it. It sort of made it a little bit more of an amusing part of the exchange, but also made it more real in that way that we're all doing different things in mealtime.
Speaking of storytelling, then, was there interaction in the family with the sharing and reminiscing of stories from other holidays and other times?
I don't think so. I think people were just enjoying the moment. And, we had guests as well as family in the gathering. So we're also meeting some people for the first time via Zoom. And this is the type of holiday where guests are encouraged to be part of it. And that's also makes it more of a celebration that you're inviting others into your home and not just family. So that made it all the more relevant and also interesting because we had conversations about what people do and how they were doing during this crisis and all of that. But I think we all also wanted to enjoy the moment rather than focus on the virus and all the hardships. So we joked as much as possible and tried not to focus on the bad stuff, but just the thankfulness that we were all able to be together.
Connecting. We're all trying to find our
Mhm.
ways to do that in new and creative ways. I'm glad your mother can do that. Is she going to keep the iPad in
She
with
still
you
has
again?
it, although I don't think she's using it right now, but it's good to know that we're able to perhaps access for other video meetings that we may have with her. Because one of the things that we can't do during this virus crisis is we can't go visit her
Right.
and be with her. And I visited her just right before the virus started, so I probably was the last person to spend some time with her, but I'm glad I did because we don't know how long this is going to last in terms of sequestering in place and not being able to travel as we have.
So, speaking of the elderly, and you said she is actually living at home in her own home.
Correct.
That's pretty amazing for 93. We'll
It is.
continue to pray that she stays healthy and able
Thank you.
to stay alone and not have to go into one of those care centers where the virus seems to be a little bit more prevalent. That
Indeed.
she can stay healthy. I really enjoyed talking. It is good for us to see the parallels of Passover right now, to understand that plagues have been around for a long, long, long time, and that they're part of our story as humans. Bennett, is there any other way that this coronavirus is changing your life?
Well, I think every day for me, feel isolated. There isn't that personal interaction with, let's say, the staff members that we usually deal with every day in the office, and not anymore. I think because of the nature of the work that I do and that we deal with charities, I'm also very much aware of the hardships that the charitable sector is facing in shortfalls in revenue and contributions, and many of them are having to cut back and in some cases let staff go and make other very hard decisions. But those organizations are so important, especially now, because there is tremendous need. So, I mean, the one message I think I've had through this is how important philanthropy is to our society. And, for people listening to this message, think of the charities that you support and support them. Make sure that your contributions are going to the causes you care about because they really need your help, especially this year more than most.
Right. We don't need to just wait a fundraising drive or the end of the year for our tax deductions, but actually
Right.
see the needs right now. One of my other guests made the point that in a couple years, some of these people that are actually receiving the assistance right now, that are receiving it, having never planned to be in a position of need to receive it, are one day going to be on the other side of this and wonder where can they give their money, and they're going to remember the help that they got. And I think that taking that one step further, there are many, many of us in our lives, especially the older we get, right, who have been in situations where at different times of our lives, somebody has stepped out to meet us in a need, whether it's an outreached hand, whether it's been financial or physical needs or emotional needs. And this is the time to remember that if you're in a position to give back, give back.
You're right. And the other thing is that some of the young people are particularly looking to crowdfunding sites to help individual families that they read stories about. And I understand there is a motivation to want to know who specifically you helped. But, while that certainly is an avenue for some, organized philanthropy fills a very important need. And look at the food banks and how important a role that they're taking. And they are really being besieged with requests and shortfalls as well in terms of meeting demands. So you have to remember charities are also fulfilling an extremely important activity that really is also needs to be supported. So just don't think of crowdfunding as the only way to help.
Well, and crowdfunding actually poses some risks for scams and frauds
It
too.
does.
If you do decide that that is the way you must do it, please be really careful.
Advice on that is, of course, to give, if you do a crowdfunding site, it's always best to give to people that you individually know that are asking for help. And that's probably the best route to go. To give to strangers is always a risk. How are they really going to be spending that money? Is their circumstance as they really say? There is that risk that it may not be, and you will never know. So you are taking that risk.
We also should talk about one of our favorite charitable institutions, and that is the Wise Giving Alliance, and the way that people can look to the website at give.org for guidance on some of the credibility of some of these organizations.
That's right. BBB Wise Giving Alliance is a standards-based charity evaluator, and you can go to our website at give.org to find out if the charities you're supporting are meeting our 20 standards, which address governance, finances, results reporting, and accuracy of appeals, and other issues. So given that you are interested in contributing to charity, make sure that the dollars you give count, and verify that the organization has that trustworthiness factor taken care of by seeing if they meet the BBB charity standards.
Well, personally knowing you and the staff and the board members of the Wise Giving Alliance, I can attest to the high quality of moral character and values that are involved in maintaining this project and bringing this kind of resource.
Thank you for the kind words about the work that we do. We certainly do our best to provide our objective conclusions to the public so that they can make their own giving decisions. And I think it's important for people to know that checking on charities doesn't have to be a hardship. You can go to sites like us and get the information you need to be more confident in the donations that you decide to make.
Well, it's always good to talk to you. It's good to work with you. Thanks for sharing today, Bennett. Do you mind if we take a minute of silence to reflect on this grave situation?
Absolutely.
Particularly think about your mom and other elderly people, and hope for that celebration on the other end. Togethering, because we will get through this better when we get through it together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bennett.